Kaia, how are you?
Hi, Annette. I'm good. How are you?
Good, trying to get my stuff together. So, are you touring now?
Yes, yeah. It's a little bit before I get into serious touring. I'm kind of like out for 5 days and then home.
Okay.
But yeah, I am touring right now.
Okay. I listened to your new album actually. I got an advanced copy and it's very different from your other stuff and very interesting. And I want to get into that if you want to get into that. Um, I was
Yeah.
under the impression that you moved back to Montreal because of the album and your single Montreal. But no, you said you're in Brooklyn, eh?
Yeah, I was in Montreal up until 2022, 2023. So I did make my record in Montreal.
Okay.
But yeah, I ended up just splitting my time a little bit more between the States and Canada because I tour the majority of my music out of the US.
Is it hard to like, do you have family in the States? Isn't it hard as a Canadian musician to sort of go to the States and work there? Or because you went to school in the States? Is that why? No?
Well, like, yeah, I mean, I have a visa, right? Like, I've lived in New York before. I lived here in 2019.
Okay.
And yeah, like you mentioned, I went to college here, so there is a familiarity with the States in general. And I used to fly to North Carolina when I was in high school because I would go to these banjo camps in the Appalachian area. And so I would spend like a week or a couple of weeks out of the summer always in the States. So it feels like there's definitely a familiarity. And I also do actually, one of my aunts lives in Brooklyn randomly. So I do have like a little bit of family here. But yeah, I definitely miss Canada a lot. And like I think long term probably will want to go back to Canada.
Yeah, you said banjo camp. So there's not, well, maybe more now, but for a while there were not that many young people interested in playing the banjo. Were there like, you started really young, didn't you?
Yeah, I started when I was like 11, really young. Yeah.
The only one that in your age group like that wanted to play banjo? Were you in Montreal when you started playing banjo?
No, I was living in Wakefield, Quebec, so just like slightly north of Ottawa, like on the Quebec side. My mom was working for the Ottawa Folk Festival at the time, and
Okay.
I think, like I just grew up around a lot of folk music and so I think like and I played the cello at the time, and so I was like always like music was just like an environment that I was always in. And so picking up the banjo, like actually felt really natural. And I loved the sound of it and I loved how it made me feel and just how soothing it was. But I think that the thing that was harder for me was like how to communicate that with my friend group, which felt so separate from like my home life and my music life. Like it was less the banjo itself and it was more like how people saw the banjo, which was that it was like a white southern kind of grating instrument. Which like I can understand those sentiments, and especially when you're like young and you're about to be a preteen and about to be a teenager, like the last thing you want to do is stand out in any way. You just want to be like, oh, I blend in, I love like all the current types of music, and so it took me a little while to like come out of my shell that way.
Right. Yeah, I could imagine being like 12, 13, and like, telling people that you play the banjo at that time. Actually, anytime. I think maybe now, I love the fact that a lot of like folk and country is getting a lot more mainstream. It's just so ironic that like okay, the whole I'm not going to get into the whole Beyonce thing, but even the Tracy Chap I mean Tracy Chapman's not really folk. I don't know what you want to call her, but suddenly like women of color and are getting it or are considered now country, or I mean there's so many, there were so many before, but now it's becoming more and more popular. So you see like you your time has come kind of thing. I find it's a lot more open, don't you find?
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're right, and it's, like, a lot cooler than it used to be.
Exactly, that's what I was
Like
trying to say, like, yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
look at, let's just say, I love how, like, I'm gonna just say Brandy Carlisle is sort of like open this, suddenly this gate has opened with all the, like, the Joni Mitchells and the Allison Russells, and they're all just like coming out and they're all connecting and they're all helping each other and working together. And that makes me so happy. And I love you. You did a song, Montreal, with Allison Russell, who I'm a very big fan of, actually. So do you want to tell me about that
Yeah.
collaboration came about?
Sure, yeah, well, Allie and I have known each other for, gosh, years now. I would say, like, 10, if not 15 years. She's about 10-ish years older than me, so she was always kind of, like, the person that I saw in the Canadian music scene. She you know, m people may or may not know this, but she was, like, born and raised in Montreal. She speaks French. She then moved, across the country to Vancouver, then she was part of this group called Po Girl, and then later a group called Birds of Chicago with her husband JT, and then she fully went solo, and so now she's living in the States, in Nashville. And so, yeah, I knew Ali through most of those eras, and, I think she represented to me, like, a kind of longevity in the Canadian folk music scene and later, like, the American roots music scene that you can, have a family, you can, um, have a really interesting life, you can tour, you can like, she just represented so much possibility, and then even beyond that, like, you
Yeah.
can come out of trauma even and have, like, a life that you're proud of and that you're happy about and that's creative. And so when I wrote in Montreal, which is a lot about, just, like, depression and anxiety and some of the intense feelings that were happening, like, in the winter of 2021 when the lockdowns were happening, and I felt like I just couldn't see anyone, and I felt really isolated. I was listening to Ali's records at the time, and so it just made sense that, like, her sort of message and general, vibe of, like, hope and joy and, like, choosing that over some of the worst things humanly imaginable that can happen to somebody. I just, like, it made sense that I needed her voice on that, and then, of course, overlaid with this idea that, like, she really knows Montreal and she like, the spiral staircases that are, like, so iconic to the city, like, I sing about that, and so it just made sense to ask my friend and someone who inspires me to be on the record.
Yeah, she's amazing. I saw her twice. I saw her a couple of years back. She did Pop Montreal. I think it was when the Outside Child album came out. And then
Yeah,
again, just recently she was here again promoting I just blanked out. What's the last album called? It's so
The
good.
Returner.
The Returner. Yeah.
Mhm,
She didn't have
yeah.
her full band, but I mean, yeah, now she's with Hosier. I saw her touring with Hosier. I'm like, wow. Have you seen Hosier?
Yeah.
He's incredible to see. Have you seen him?
No, I haven't.
Get a chance. I mean, he's just, anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, I get excited. I love this folk reoccurrence happening where actually lyrics are as important as the melody, you know?
Mm,
And,
mhm.
and I've noticed on this album too, you have a lot to say right now. And I don't know, you can fill me in, but it seems like the most personal record you've made.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because I was starting I took this is ironic, but I took a month off in March of 2020 to write. I was like, "Okay, in March of 2020, I'm gonna stop touring and, like, take some time off to write this new record," and, like, little did I know I would be taking essentially 2 years off,
Yeah.
of
What
the
about,
road, and so the record that I was writing in March of 2020, I basically scrapped most of that because the songs just, like, didn't feel at all relevant to what I was experiencing at that time anymore, um, and so a lot of what I wrote was, like, as we were doing demos, I worked with Joe Grass, who's a a prominent Montreal musician. It's really, really great musician and producer. We co-produced the album together. And Joe has a studio in Mile End on Van Horn.
Yeah.
And I was living pretty close by. And so I just like write stuff, demo it out, take it to his place. We would work on it, retrack it maybe. And so like a lot of the process of like writing this music and creating it was much slower than I was used to. And it was really nice because I could really think about what I was writing about and like make the songs for me, because I really had no idea, like, am I going to release this album into like the ether? Like, will anyone be touring?
I
And so
wrote
like a lot of that was just taken off the plate. And so it was cool to be a little bit more honest.
I like that. In my notes, I wrote, I can tell you made this album for you. Like it's just not just personal, but are you a Rick Rubin fan? Did you read his books, or do you know who he is, or do you follow him at all?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I have his latest book.
Yeah, on creativity.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's good.
yeah.
I like he says, create it for yourself, like what you like, make what you like. You know what I mean? I mean, people
Mhm,
are going to like it or not like it. I mean, not everyone likes everything, whatever, but that's the
mhm.
feeling. When I was listening to the album, I remembered Rick Rubin when he talks about create something that you would listen to, that you would enjoy, as well as not just creating for, I mean, of course, people are going to end up liking it or connecting to it somehow. But when you really like it, it kind of shows, and it's more authentic, I find.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Um, and I think that was like maybe part of a gift of the isolation, because for so long, I viewed that time as like strictly difficulty. Like everything was harder, everything was scarier, more anxiety, more sadness. But I think being alone for so much of that really forced me to focus on like what do I like versus what is easy. What could I say that's easy? What placeholder line could I put in that's like passable versus like how do I really feel about this? And that was like that's where I had the most fun, was going in and like both Joe and I being like, well, we don't know what this record is going to sound like, but we kind of followed the songwriting, and that we were like, okay, what instruments do we like? Let's not think about like emulating anyone else's record, but
Yeah.
like what can we put together? What feels like the next right step? And there was a lot of vulnerability in that because we really didn't understand what the end goal would really sound like, but we had to just trust that it would come together, rather than like the other option, which I've done before, which is like bass player, guitar player, um, drummer, singer, which is like a very like conventional, like, yeah, we know what that's going to sound like. We have a palette for that. We kind of threw all that out. And that was really, really exciting and a little scary.
Well, there's not banjo on every song. I mean, the opening track doesn't have banjo. The first song is
No, no.
the witch one, the witch one, Pious Pilgrim one. Yeah. I like you're very angry on this album. Like I feel this anger, and I really enjoyed that. And I mean, what's the album? Is it called Grenades? Grenades, right? The other one,
Yeah.
a lot of political issues and history and things like that, which it was your voice, but it wasn't exactly your voice. But this is your voice more than the other album. Don't you find?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So who's Pious Pilgrim? Like, do you want to get into it, or do you don't want to get
Yeah,
into
let's get into
it?
it. Yeah. Yeah, that song, I call it I call it a whittler. Like there are songs that kind of come out. Yeah, do you write songs?
I
You have a
write
bunch of guitars.
mostly are my sons. I have one that has banjo strings, but it's not a banjo. And it was my dad's I'll show it to you because it's cool. It's not cool, but it's funky. This is
Whoa,
a balalaika from Soviet Armenia. It's yeah, it was my
that's
dad.
cool.
We couldn't, I needed it to get repaired, and the only strings we could find were banjo strings. So anyway,
Whoa.
you know what? I mean, I'll give you my interpretation, and if I'm wrong, you'll tell me I'm wrong. But this is, do you want to hear what I thought of the witch song?
I'd love to hear it.
Okay. I could be wrong. So you lived in the States for a while, right?
Mhm.
Okay, this is my interpretation. My interpretation is like, did you experience racism and had to deal with people that were, well, racist or really cruel to you or disrespectful to you, or maybe didn't take you seriously as a musician or as a person or as an artist? Is that what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of what it's about. That's a really good guess. I would say it's less any specific point in time, but maybe a general feeling that I've had of anger at being dismissed a lot in my life, which I think, happens a lot to women, happens a lot to racialized people, queer people, in, various degrees of severity. And I remember reading The Scarlet Letter.
Yeah.
I read that, I think, right before the pandemic hit. I was finishing it as the pandemic hit. And yeah, just thinking a lot about how the woman in the book, you
Hester
know,
Prynne. Hester Prynne, is that her name? Hester.
Hester Prynne, yeah, Hester Prynne. Yeah, yeah, good memory.
Read that.
Hawthorne kind of like
Yeah.
he wrote her as just being so thoroughly ostracized from her community, when really, I mean, I don't want to spoil the book for those who haven't read it, but really, it takes two to
Yeah, I know.
commit adultery.
Right.
And this, the other character in the book, he faces his own internal guilt, but he's never really, brought to task for anything that he's done to contribute to this. And then also to point out that, like, he's considered, like, this idea of, like, women needing to, like, adhere to specific social norms, and, like, there are definitely words for women who don't adhere to that. Like, there's words like slut and whore, but, like, I don't feel like there's the equivalent in the male side. Like, it's like, "Oh, you're such a cad, it's almost like a respect,
Well, you're a
maybe like a."
player, you're a playboy, you're a stud.
Right. Yeah, it's, like, always with, like, a kind of a generally, if not positive, then, like, neutral connotation.
But a
And so,
sexual man is powerful. A sexual man is powerful. A sexual woman is dirty.
yeah, she's a Jezebel. You see it reflected in so much of, like, in terms of the Bible, in terms of, literature, Hawthorne. Um, and so, yeah, I just, like, wanted to inhabit, like, what does that feel? What does that rage feel like? And if it were expressed, how would it be expressed? And as I was thinking about her character, I was like, damn, like, I feel this in myself too, like, all the ways in which I self-censor, or I, like, try to predict other people's behavior. Like, it's something as simple as, like, if I go to a show to sound check, like, I have to be really confident that I know my gear, because,
And,
not everyone, but,
and
like, sometimes I'll get some, like, misogyny coming at me, and I like, don't know where or when it's gonna come, but I have to be, like, ready and armored.
yeah,
And so I think it was a way to kind of, like, just, like, sit in that anger and just, like, feel its righteousness a little bit, and, like, it's just so fun to put your emotions into music,
yeah,
because you're not hurting anyone, and it's cathartic,
yeah.
like, it's just, I feel like I was scared of anger for a long time, because I just felt like, well, if I really access my anger, then it'll never end. Like, I have so much anger
It's
that,
good.
like, if this springs from me, it'll never end, and I was really scared of it. But I think tapping into it through music was, like, the beginning of getting to know it better, and knowing that it has a role that's helpful in a lot of ways.
You have a very soft voice and you don't use a lot of, you don't play electric guitar, and your music is very soft. But a lot
Mhm.
of the lyrics on this album, like if people listen closely, they're pretty cutting and they're pretty sharp, and they're um I don't know how to say it, like it is coming across. I am feeling the anger, and it's not like you're not bashing people over the head with it, but you're implying a lot. just in that subtle way, which I love, which I'm going to make a few comparisons as I was listening to the album. Do you know who Suzanne Vega is? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It reminded me a bit of a Suzanne, one of her famous albums. And now I just blanked out, but it was like the 30th or 40th anniversary of that album just recently. I have the CD, but I forget the name of the album. The one with My Name is Luca. Do you remember that song? No? Anyway,
No, I need to check this record out.
Suzanne, it's a really, I can't believe Solitude Standing, it's called Solitude Standing. I have like
Okay, I'm gonna write that
a
down.
lot of, they're old, so like I have to delete files in my head because anyway, that, and also, you know what I really liked here? I'm going to tell you. I'm telling you what I like. Tigers. Yes. I liked Tigers. You end with Tigers. And I get this Paul Simon vibe from you, the way you write. It's subtle, you're telling a story, it's soft, but the words are heavy at the same time. So, has anyone ever told you that before?
No, but you know what? I'll take the compliment. I'll take any way I can be likened to Paul Simon. I
I'm
happily will take it because I love him so much. I love his work and very influenced by it.
I just love his lyrics, all his lyrics. They just, the way he writes is, it's different. It hits you hard, and he does it so subtly, you know. You're on tour now, or you're taking a break?
Well, yeah, I'm on tour now. I also play in a string band, a black string band called New Dangerfield. So we're playing a festival on Sunday, and then I have a week and a half break, and then I start the Strange Medicine tour in mid-May, and that goes through the end of June.
Yes, the album is called Strange Medicine. That line is in that Feder. How do you say that? What's in it?
They don't.
They don't? Because they don't, sorry. That's a real political person from Grenada, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's pronounced Grenada,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, I think, you know, I part of me, like, Grenades was really a concept album, like, just very intentionally was, like, interspersed with my dad's words about experiencing the American invasion and the socialist revolution in the '80s, late '70s into the '80s, and for this one, I think, like, I was trying to think of what the through line is, and I think it's really, like, me drawing some kind of inspiration from either historical characters or fictional characters, um, in order to sort of, like, make sense of how I was feeling.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that is because, like, I just didn't travel. I'm someone who, you know, every other week I'm on a plane going somewhere, or I'm in a car going somewhere. You know, like, my life is very, uh active and, like, mobile, you know, and I'm like kind of like floating above, like going to a city, going to another city, and then all of a sudden I was like at home for the first time in a really long time. And so I think, like, I had to travel in my mind. I had to like seek like wisdom and experience from, like, different little pockets. And I think that's what Strange Medicine is like all of these people were in difficult situations, whether they be, like, fictional based on reality, historical fiction, or actual historical figures. And, like, how did they figure their way out of it? How did the story end? You know, um, is the story still going? And so I think with Faidon, Julien Faidon was he was a black revolutionary who was determined to abolish slavery in Grenada in the late 1700s, and he failed. You
Yeah.
know, and so many of the historical records that I read, his story ends with him failing.
Mm.
But I've read a couple of books written by Grenadians who have an entirely different perspective on this situation, and they're like, yeah, that revolution itself didn't end in slavery being abolished, but it like instilled a revolutionary impulse in Grenadian people still, you
Yeah.
know? So that was cool. I think I just like I needed to understand that there was hope even in really terrible situations. And it must have in some tangible way had to do with the Black Lives Matter protests, with the killings of, George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, of COVID, of so many people dying, the Trump, and in the storming of the Capitol, like it was just relentless. And it is still currently. Um, yeah. And so I think like a lot of it is like, how do I find hope? Like how do I find like medicine from what seems like only as poison, only as terrible things happening?
Yeah. I mean, I had a comment about hope, and I have a lot of notes here. So your internet song, I also have a love-hate relationship with the internet. It's like I want to reduce my screen time because I get sucked in, right?
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
miss out on things that I should have, because I'll be honest, you kept popping up on my feed. And I guess because I follow Allison Russell and I follow Joy. I follow a lot of folk artists, women of color, all kinds of women. And you kept popping up, and I'm not the biggest banjo connoisseur. Like a lot of, I'm being honest.
I love it. Yeah.
You know what? Like my first experience with I was going to say, what can I tell her about? What do I know about the banjo? It was Kermit the Frog playing Rainbow Connection. Me watching Sesame Street as a child. And I was like, oh, okay, so frogs play the banjo, and then a lot of making you laugh. And then do you know what I'm talking about, right? Kermit the Frog,
Yes.
Rainbow Connection. I love that song. Everybody does. And then from Kermit the Frog, I moved on. This is before your time. I don't know if your parents knew, but when I was an immigrant child growing up in Montreal. I didn't speak English till I was about 6 or 7. So we had like 2 channels on our TV, and Saturday nights at 7, there was a show called Hee Haw. Do you know that show? You do? Oh, wow. So I
I
would watch,
do. Yeah. I've never watched it, but I know about it.
and there was Roy Clark, and there was all these like fabulous, guitarists and banjo players, and they would play, and I was like, wow. So that was my extent of banjo knowledge. Do you know what I'm saying? But then
Yeah.
here comes Allison Russell, like winning Grammys, and just opening doors for people. I find. I mean, I know she's not the first one. There's people that Rihanna Gibbons, is it? Is that
Rhiannon Giddens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many. There's a lot. I can't name them all because I don't know them, but there's so many. Which,
Hmm.
yeah. So it's really there's like this banjo folk invasion. Did you see? Yeah, did you watch the Grammys when she sang with Joni Mitchell? Did you see that? No.
I did see that. Yes. And I saw the Newport, show.
Performing.
Well, I wasn't there for it, but I saw the video of the Newport show as well.
Yeah, it's really heartwarming to see all these women on stage together, and Sister String,
Yeah.
just all of them, and it's like we need a festival like that in Canada. Like, I don't know, do we have any folk festivals in Montreal? I don't think so. Not really.
I think there was a festival called Folk sur le Canal that was
Uh,
by the Lachine Canal, but I don't know if it's still going.
Not grand scale.
Um,
Like
no, there's no. Yeah, not like anything near the jazz festival size or
what really takes over. Yeah. I also like
yeah.
you're in the US and you tour, you do a lot of these festivals. Have you seen Larkin Poe? They're really good too, but they're more bluesy than folk.
Okay, yeah, no, I haven't seen them.
One is on lap steel. They're really good.
I love lap steel.
Sorry?
It's beautiful. I love lap steel.
Check out Larkin Poe. They're really good. They're 2 sisters, actually. They're really good. Have anything? I know you're going to be performing in Montreal.
Yes, I will be there. I don't have the date offhand. I can find it if you want.
Wait, I'll tell you. Is it May
Um,
23rd?
yes, that's right. Yeah. La Soterea. Yeah, with Tanya Iyer, she's like an incredible songwriter and artist. She leans like a little bit more jazz and electronic.
Cool.
Um, but yeah, she's awesome. I'm a huge fan of hers. So she's gonna open up the show. It's gonna be great. I'm so excited to come back to Montreal. I mean, the record is such a Montreal record. I mean, that's what I feel like, that's the other thing is Montreal has always been known, and artists in Montreal have always been known to be experimental, to do things a little bit differently than records like coming out of Toronto and New York and LA.
I think that
And
is.
I'm just I don't know. Part of me wonders if, because for a long time Montreal was so affordable to
Oh,
live in as an artist, or more affordable than other cities, and so
Toronto and Vancouver for sure.
maybe more time and more freedom to explore creativity and to try things out than in other cities, which I find are a little bit more like, okay, we have 4 hours to record. You come in, you record, you leave, and there's already like an established palette that, it's a little bit more rote maybe. And so I really don't know what it is. Maybe it's like part of the French presence in Montreal. And but yeah, I just find people to be like just so creative and to think about music in a different way.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
And I have like I have mad respect. Like I love the Bar Brothers and
Yeah, me too.
you know.
You share a producer with them. I think they
Oh
produce.
yeah, yeah, Joe. Yeah, Joe has played in their band and possibly produced um some of their records. But yeah, I just love them and have listened to them for years. And like Lassa de Sela um was like such an amazing songwriter and passed away way too soon. And yeah, there's just so much great music out of Montreal.
I think Montreal is just more open. It's more diverse than any
Yeah,
Canadian. I mean, there's ethnic minorities in every Canadian city, but I just find Montreal is a lot more diverse, more accepting
yeah,
a little bit.
yeah, 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 that's possible.
Funny you're referencing the Scarlet Letter, and it's like I had to read that for school. Like you read that on your free time for your pleasure.
Yeah, I felt like, I mean, I read it because I felt like it was a classic that I missed reading in school. I mean, I read like, 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale. Like I read all the classics that you are kind of all the dystopian classics that you're supposed to read in school, but for some reason I missed The Scarlet Letter, and I liked Nathaniel Hawthorne's writing. I think I read one of his short stories in college,
What
and
did
then yeah.
you
Hmm?
weren't like a literature major or anything. You were in music though, weren't you?
Kind of. So I had a scholarship to play banjo in the school string band, but that was more of like more equivalent to like a sports team. So like we would tour around and we would play music in communities as kind of like a promotional thing for the college. And so that, yeah, like I was in a string band class and I was in a percussive dance class. Um and I was learning old time music and singing and harmony work on the side, but it was much like people spend extra time on sports and studies. So my studies were religion and philosophy as a major, and then English and literature as a minor.
I did
So
English lit as a major and philosophy and religious studies as a minor.
no way, just flipped.
I was like getting into all this Hindu stuff, and I was like, I don't know. Anyway,
It was good talking with you.
Great talking with you as well. And I'm going to come see you in May in a couple of weeks. Not actually pretty soon. All right.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Come say hi.
Take care. All right.
Nice to meet you, Annette. Yeah, bye.